Hey there, everybody. It's Corey with The Abundant Artist, and I am excited to broadcast with you today and talk with Rex Hausmann. Rex lives and works as a full-time artist in San Antonio and New York City. He's broadcasting today from Brooklyn. Is that right, Rex?
It's true.
Yeah. He currently works in his family's warehouses that have been transformed as is it Hausmann or Hausmann?
Hausmann.
Hausmann, okay. The Hausmann Millworks Creative Community. So Hausmann studied business and art at the University of Texas at San Antonio and then Baylor University, and then transferred on a scholarship to Savannah College of Art and Design, where he earned a BFA in painting. In Atlanta, Hausmann studied under international artists Sandy Skoglund and Patrick Doherty. He's worked on projects both nationally and internationally, and has shown and lectured globally. His work in large projects often revolve around identities found in communal and domestic contexts, tracing their connections to religion and history. You can find more about Rex on his Facebook or over on his gallery website, which you can find. There's two of them. There's Hausmann Millworks, and the other one is, oh, darn it, I didn't have it in my notes. It's on the registration page. Yeah, Rex Hausmann.
Rex Hausmann.
Yeah, cool. So I'm excited to have you on today, Rex. I spent a bunch of time last week looking at your website and your art, and listening to interviews you've done with other people, and you're all over the place. You're a well-publicized artist.
Thanks, man. I try.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to be here. One of the things that you've talked about with your art a lot, your art career, is grow where you are. And now you live primarily in San Antonio, but you spend a lot of time in New York. So what does it mean for you to grow where you are?
Have on the outside of our family buildings, grow where you're planted or grow where you are. I just had a dinner last night with a guy named Felix where it was just being. And what's interesting about kind of that concept is I was told a lot early on, you need to move to New York, you need to move to LA, you need to move to New York, you need to move to LA. Mm-hmm. And the reality was I just didn't have money to do it. And I just said, well, everybody keeps telling me to go away. Like, why don't I just here? And it was really just about kind of that philosophy of showing up every day, doing the best you can with everything you can do. And that really hasn't changed. And Don and I were just transporting paintings from his studio to a storage unit this morning. And last night I had dinner with a director who is on a national level, who I was meeting with in 2006 at the very beginning. And we walked around Tribeca and met at the Odeon and had drinks and dinner. We're just BSing about, how cool life can be. And right now I'm accepting a residency at the Sheen Foundation in April and May, where I'll be creating a whole new body of work. But I've been making that trip for the past 11 years, about 10, 11 years. It really is kind of a network of friends and good intentions and just trying your best. So grow. It is more of a philosophy than it is just like a catchphrase that came up, in some witty board meeting or something. And I think if you grow organically and you grow with sincerity and you grow to the best of your abilities, kind of everything else falls in line.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. When I was in college, I went to theater school, and all of my classmates were planning on moving to New York. And I was lucky enough to be in a show with a bunch of New York actors, and they all talked about, we kind of got the inside scoop on how expensive it is and what life is like and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, why would I do that? Why wouldn't I just go somewhere cheaper and start building my career there? And if it takes me to New York, great. So that's what I ended up doing. Is we moved to Portland, Oregon, which was a lot cheaper than New York City. And now Portland's all cool and all the New York people are moving here. So whatever. But New York is great, and I go there a few times a year. So it is interesting to see how you can grow a career locally where you are.
Well, I think just like New York will always be New York. I mean, I've been talking to Don about this all the time. He is a full-time New York artist. And it's just this place is just there's such an energy here that's insane. I mean, it's just radically different than anywhere else in the world, really. Because I've been in Hong Kong, I've been in Beijing and all over the place. But in New York, it just is this own little deal. But in your local community, if you're really rooted to that, that comes in deal. And so Felix Padron and I were talking about this last night. Like San Antonio is its own little epicenter of its own little culture, and it loves it. And it's quirky and it's weird and it's awesome. And I fully embrace that, you know, but I don't think you should limit yourself to only that. You should always push yourself to do more, as much as you can within reason. And that's why I've always been making the trip to New York. There was about a 3-period hiatus with graduate school and some other stuff that kind of kept me. But I was talking with my mom yesterday on the phone while I'm up here, and she's like, honey, back up there again. Like, you're always so happy when you're up there. But I'm happy because I'm rooted to where I'm from there, and I'm rooted to where I'm here. Does that make sense? You know?
Yeah, it does. It totally does. I have so many friends from both artists that I know from The Abundant Artist, and then my friends from undergrad in New York. I love going out there and feeling the energy, and then I love coming home and being comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that constant back and forth.
Yeah. So you've got this really, like you talked about San Antonio culture. You are really deeply involved in the San Antonio culture there. You've got a series of warehouses, the Hausmann Millworks. So just tell us a little bit about what that is and what happens there.
Well, the Millworks is a large manufacturing facility that was my dad's. He did architecture with my mom for about 35 years, and they did stuff as interesting and as intricate as the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C., the Central Public Library in downtown San Antonio, and a number of attorneys' offices, including like the Capitol. They did all the judges' chambers. And so I grew up in an environment of a very working class kind of industry. And my brother and I were pushing brooms when we were 10 and 11 for $1 an hour. And so like we learned how to work really, really hard early on. And just being in and around kind of that environment of a small business teaches you a lot more than any education can teach you. It's like the education of life, right?
Yeah.
And so my dad started things renting actually with a friend out of school, and it just grew and grew and grew. And then for about 30 years, that company, and then there was a time of transition where we said, I think what's interesting is actually in failures or in the pursuit of something you're dreaming, something else comes up and you just have to be sharp enough to pick up on it. And so I still remember when we started the mill, I asked my dad, can I take the old, I don't want to turn on the water or the electricity. And I just want to kind of have that as my studio. I'm paying rent right now a month, insurance, and it's killing me, you know? I'm doing all this work and doing all this stuff, and it's fine, but getting the ball moving, what about the old space in the back? And so I remember this story about Jasper Johns and Robert Rauschenberg. Robert Rauschenberg was a really famous New York painter, as you know, and Leo Castelli was visiting his studio, and then he said, hey, who's that? And he said, oh, that's my friend Jasper. And as I was kind of, you know, running the gallery in Bernie, everybody knew that I was doing things. And then moved it to downtown San Antonio, and all the connections that I had made from just doing when I was in a geographic location that was close to the downtown center, everybody already knew who I was and what I was doing, and then they just started to visit. And so I remember I would have David Almaguer's studio next to mine, and we started with 2 people, and then he started to meet the same people that I would meet. And then some of my other friends, Russell Stevenson and Patrick Wynn and Kyle Martin and David, we all got together and we just started throwing shows like in small town, we call it the middle of somewhere, sure, like Mason, Texas. And so we just started building this energy, you know, and then my family started to get involved, and we started to go, okay, well, you can have the space over there by that pylon to that belt grinder, you know, that was a guy named James. And then another person came in named John. Hey man, can I have that little office over there? We're like, yeah, sure, go for it. We were able to turn on the water, so we had running water. That was a pretty big deal. And then turn on the electricity, you know, like, and it's like, all right, we can do this. And it became this big, I don't know how to, very organic, man. Like I was moving old machines and making space for artists. And then my dad said, you know, build some walls. And we had never really thought of that before. We just kind of used old existing closets and stuff. And then my dad started to use his engineering abilities and started like designing these little studios. And so what we started to notice is like people really needed space. Like they just needed space and a sense of community, or someone that was in the same trenches, so to speak, as they were. And I mean, I'm an artist. I still spend about 75% of my time on my art and painting and calls and shows. And that just grew and grew and grew. And my mom started to bring her love of education, of nurturing people. And she started a little thing called PAVE, which means People Access Vision and Encouragement. And we started to invite different directors to come by the studios and just talk with people. Like, how do you put together a portfolio? How do you build a website? How do you meet people? You know, like we just had a thing at the studios called How Do You Take Someone to Lunch? And we're not really like a school or a nonprofit or anything. I mean, we're just studios. But we have all these little things that are out throughout, I guess, you know, the month, once a month, 2 months, something that we are very conscious about. Well, what would I want to hear, you know, or help someone? What would be like a little luncheon we could do? And so I found that with that knack of like caring, it really grew something very cool. And so that's in a nutshell. And we've been doing it for 10 years now. It's really wonderful to be a part of.
I love this so much. We had a couple of years ago, we had an artist on the podcast named Stephen Goldsmith, who kind of a similar story, that he just needed some studio space. So he and it wasn't family, but a bunch of other artists got together and found a rundown old building in downtown Salt Lake City and turned it into sculpture spaces. And they all lived in the they like lived in the floor above. They eventually turned it into apartments and stuff, but initially it was just crashing in an empty building that they bought. And it's a great story. You should go back and I'll when we put the show notes up, I'll put a link back to Stephen Goldsmith's article. But he's that experience of going from buying an empty building and turning it into something. He eventually ended up being the city planner for Salt Lake City for the 2002 Olympics. Wow. And now he's an emeritus professor at the University of Utah architecture department. So
it's fantastic.
Like, maybe like, I don't know where this will go for you and your family and the Millworks, but I love seeing artists make things happen in their communities like this. It's something that, for whatever reason, a lot of artists are really drawn to that, and that energy of change and moving a city around meshes really well with the energy of an artist.
I think the main thing that we've found, and it's become like kind of a double-edged sword because you deal with so many people, right? And so like, there's a lot of, we keep drama pretty much to a minimum, which is wonderful. Our studios are fabulous people. But there's just a lot of people, you know, like, and whenever you deal with a lot of people, there's a lot of stuff. And I think at the core of what my family and I believe, and I really have to stress, it really is a family effort, and it's a studio effort. So we really see each individual as an individual, and some need more attention than others, you know, and we try to honor like whatever stage you're at in life. That's what we try to honor. Like, some artists are just like, I just want to show anybody, but I'm happy that there are other artists around me. There's not like a chop shop and a, you know, tech and a, you know, a bar and you know, like a quilting thing next to, you know, a storage facility. You see what I mean? Like, there's a very conscious, you know, we don't rent to these people. Yes, we rent to these people. We have a creative group of people. That's really what we click here. And sometimes you have to learn to say no, just because you're saying, well, that's really not a fit for this community. There are other communities. I remember specifically someone had a studio with us and then left and building. And he said, it's been 13 months that I've been here, and I've only ever seen 2 people, period, like in 13 months, you know? And whereas at the mill, we try to create a very conducive, you're going to see people every day, whether you like it or not, there are going to be people there. what I think is funny is people, they kind of make a beeline to their studio, but they'll like wave at someone, and that's all they want. But just that being there, like a little Keurig in the front, and we do some gallery stuff. I think our main core is that we're studios and that we care, but we care within reason. You know, like we're not in the business of building careers. That's your job. Our job is to have 4 white walls with a door, but a group of people care about you, you know?
Yeah.
And I found that intention and that real heart of the thing has grown it. And I'd like to say that just like it's the constant daily effort that makes that possible. Does that make sense? It's not like a one board meeting or any monthly meeting that makes this happen. It's every day, you know?
Yeah.
And adjusting every day. So that's, and we could talk about the mill for 3 hours, man. I mean, that thing is a beast. And
I love it. I love how excited you are about it. Everybody should definitely go check that out, and we'll have links up in the show notes and everything. I want to give a shout out to the people who are watching us live. A couple of comments from Chris Callan and Nicolette Yates saying that they love the live sessions that we're doing, and saying hi from Kentucky and North Carolina. So thanks y'all for listening. Yeah. So we had some back and forth via email between when I first introduced myself to you and you agreed to come on. And one of the things you mentioned, artists get into selling their art for different reasons. They get into making art for different reasons. And one of the things that came up when you were talking about that in email was you emphasized that artists need to get into discerning shows that actually have a jury process. And I want to talk a little bit about that and ask you what you mean about, or rather why you think that is important. Why do you think it's important for artists to get into these shows?
Well, I think let's talk about like what stage of your career you're at, you know, and what age you are. And so let's talk about those two things first. I don't see age bracket for art. I mean, listen, there's not going to be a prodigy that's 15 years old that shows at the Pompidou. You know, I mean, it's just not going to. Maybe it'll happen. I don't know, but
never say
usually
never.
people that are. Yeah, I mean, I've never said never. You know, like look at Duchamp in the urinal. Yeah. So I mean, I think that are important, and I think when you talk about discerning shows, that isn't just the Whitney Biennial. You know, that isn't just Site Santa Fe, just Art Basel Miami Beach and all the commercial stuff. And that's not just one museum show. I think it's kind of an aggregate of any and all. And the thing to understand is there's not just the art world, as in one art world. There are art worlds, as in plural. So there's like the Western art world, and then there's the contemporary art world, and then there's the design art world, and then there's the art world of, you know, the dude on the Riverwalk doing portraits, and then there's like the classical art world, and then there's like the atelier art world. There are all these worlds, and very specific like do's and don'ts. Where'd you go to school? Like, do you talk about Titian? Do you talk about Vermeer? Or do you talk about Francis? Or do you talk about Kehinde Wiley? You know, like, I mean, those are all very different conversations, and they're happening at the same time.
So a question that's coming up from our live audience, Rex, is Sarah O'Connor is saying, I've been looking for some heavy hitting shows, and I just happen to know a little bit about her. She is an up and coming artist. She's doing a lot of outdoor shows right now, and doing pretty well at these outdoor shows, but she's looking to sort of level up and get to some shows where her art can be sold at a price that is, you know, more respectable and sort of at the next level of her career. If you're in a local town somewhere in the country, you know, would you recommend figuring out which of these big art shows to go to?
I would say, what kind of work do you make? You know, like you're not going to go to Art Basel Beach if you're a portrait painter.
Sure.
I mean, you may, but it's not gonna, you would be better going to Santa Fe, you know what I mean, or Taos, New Mexico, if you're a portrait painter, like an old school, you know, unless you like Lucian Freud a lot. Well, then you're definitely going to go check out the Lucian Freud shows. Or like Chuck Close. You could say that Chuck Close is a portrait painter. He's really not. He called the portrait the landscape. And he's a highly critical, very Yale, very driven contemporary artist. And it went back to like the roots of him forgetting faces because he has some kind of mental thing that he doesn't remember people's names, like literally.
Right. Yeah.
So what I would say to that is know your marketplace. Does that make sense? Like, know the different brackets of like a $500 painting is different than a $5,000 painting, is different than a $10,000 painting, is different than a $50,000, is different than a $250,000 painting. Those are all completely different art worlds.
Right.
And you can wind your way through those, which is fine, but know that there isn't a quick race to this whole thing. It's really a lifelong, very committed, very specific track. And what I mean by the track, and let me explain this a little bit. A chief curator named Rene Barrio told me something once. I was lecturing at a college, and I said, Rene, what would you say to young artists? And he said, Rex, your career is like a train track with multiple stops along the way. On those stops, you may dabble. For instance, I started in installation art. Why? Because I had just finished graduate school. The economy tanked, buy anything. And a critic named Robert Storr said it's a really good time to be an installation artist. At the same time, I had been coming up to New York and seeing stuff by one particular show called Hello Math Lab in the Sun, which started in Ballroom Marfa, moved to Art Basel Miami Beach, and then those guys came up to New York and started doing these really crazy installations in the Lower East Side. And I really liked it. I thought it was interesting. So I spent a lot of time doing installation work. I met some other artists along the way, Michelle Carollo, who I just met with about 3-4 days ago at the New Museum, Franklin Evans, who's doing some really amazing stuff, if you're into that. In very specific people doing very specific things. But I found along the way that I'm really more of a painter. And I started to focus more and more, shifting away from installation, more to like static paintings and series. And I have a point in all this. I'm trying to answer a question, but it's more of a roundabout way. You know what I mean? Is this making sense? I mean,
what I'm hearing you say is if you want to find a show that's a good fit for you, you need to get to know who's showing where and sort of pay attention to what's going on in the art world.
Yeah, pay attention and just like ask questions. Like call your museum, show up to an opening. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're in Kansas City, the Kemper is amazing, you know. If you're in Houston, the Contemporary Art Museum of Houston is really great. A lady named Valerie Cassell Oliver ran that for a long time. Now she's somewhere else, but people are very accessible if you show that you are doing what you need to be doing as an artist and you're learning. Like, just keep learning, I guess, would be my answer.
Yeah. We will, in the show notes for this episode, we have a list of some of the bigger shows. We'll see if we can publish that. And we have a couple of other resources for finding shows. So we'll publish those in the show notes just for those that are listening later. I want to
add an aside to that because like it's really important that you know the difference between Art in America and Art News and High Fructose. Those are all very different. You know what I mean? Like Art Forum is different than Cabinet, is different than Art News, is different than Art in America, is different than
Hyperallergic, whatever.
There's a million of them. And so like knowing that if I'm like I said, a very hardcore representational painter, I'm not going to send my images into, Art News or Art Forum. I mean, unless it fits in that context, like Chuck Close or something like that, you know, like, you only got so much energy, invest it well, you know? Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about your art career. So you sell in New York and San Antonio. Do you sell primarily through art galleries, right?
Well, a little bit of all. I would say that the gallerists that I deal with, I've known for a long time, and they're very cool people. that I really see eye to eye with. And I've known him for a long time. I sell a lot out of my studio as well, and I sell to a collector base that I've been able to build that are pretty discerning about what they buy, you know? And there's a lot of trust that goes in there, meaning they met you 7 years ago, but it took them 7 years to make a decision. And then finally when they did, they bought like 4. You see what I mean? And so like, I think the key about the whole business end of this thing is that you do everything you can do with integrity. Do the best you can to like a base of people that believe in your vision. That could be a gallerist, that could be a museum director, that could be a museum curator, and you're very clear with your vision. Or at least you're trying to be clear with your vision. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to give like bullet points of this is what I want to do and this is how I'm going to do it, and you know, this is when it's going to happen. Well, that's not really realistic.
Doesn't really work that way. Yeah.
No, it's more like this is what I'm on the way to doing. This is what I'm trying to do, and you know, think. And if you do that long enough and over enough time, people have a way of really trusting what you're trying to do based on what you've done in the past. You know, like for instance, one of my big breaks was the McName Museum of Art. And I had been speaking with their chief curator for going on 9 years. And I didn't even know he really liked my work, quite frankly, because I just didn't know. And then out of left field, it comes in my email box. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. You know, this is awesome. But he's known me for a long time. And he saw my shows kind of go from, you know, self-curated fun shows to some more seriously like, you know, showing in a little museum and then showing in a little bigger museum and then doing some projects in New York or whatever. And then finally, like, it hit the right place, right time. And it was like, yeah, Rex, go for it. And it was great. So that's really what I encourage people is like, keep, you know, don't bug people. Like, don't email them weekly. But when you have something to say, tell them, you know.
Yeah, interesting. So was it intentional for you to sort of go the traditional gallery route and work through these museums and these bigger name things? Or did it just sort of happen organically? Because there's a lot of artists out there who are making a living just selling, you know, out of their studios, and they're not showing in museums and they've never shown in a gallery. You know, how did your career go this way as opposed to the other way?
Dude, I started in coffee shops, man. For real. Like, I was young and I just was like, you know, I have these old truck paintings and I want to show them in a restaurant. And I remember I was doing hardcore representational painting of old trucks based on my granddad. And they were very kind of country western kind of things. But it's just because I didn't know much about, you know, just painting what's in front of me. I didn't know about the whole like conversation, quote unquote, of art, if you know what I mean. I was a kid.
When you say conversation of art, what do you mean by that? Because I think if you didn't go through the BFA, MFA route, you may not know what that means. So just explain to our audience what that means.
Well, a conversation of art is like where we're at right now. If you're a contemporary artist, quote unquote, the only thing that means is you're making art now. Like, contemporary doesn't mean like a movement. That just means you're alive and making stuff. I think people attribute contemporary to like a puffball on a string suspended by a cinder block, painted in feathers or something. You know what I mean? I think that's contemporary. It's like,
is that
not
a real piece, or did you just make that up?
No, I just made it up. But okay. Hey, go to the Whitney Biennial, you'll see it. I think curiosity is what really got me into the art history thing. And questioning. Like, I went to art school, started as a business major, but then switched to art and went from a 2.75 to a 4.0 because it just fascinated me. All these artists, all these movements, all these languages. And I started going up to the Met, you know, and I'd see a painting at the Metropolitan, you know, and then I'd go to a library and I'd read about it. And so you do that over a longer period of time, you're going to start going down the rabbit hole, you know, like you're going to start going, okay, Mondrian really doesn't do it for me anymore. Ego with that. And okay, Picasso's great, but you know, who's this guy named, you know, who's Anish Kapoor? That's cool. You know, who's Anson Kiefer? That's neat. You know, like, and then the more you start to like refine, I guess, your taste, that's the art world. You're gonna go to Berlin and you're gonna see some weird stuff, and you're gonna talk with the living artist that made it, and he probably doesn't speak that much English, but you like his stuff, and he gives you a catalog. See what I mean? Like, so there's really this like little world within a world that's grappling with itself, trying to figure out how is this relevant to today. Or you can just make stuff, you know, like if you like making paintings of blue dots, well then go for it, you know, like, but if you're putting out a painting of a blue dot, and Steve's spent most of his career in blue, you know what I mean? Like, or Matisse had the Blue Dancers, and actually Yves Klein and Matisse referenced the Sea of Nice, which they both grew up in, lived in, and it's where the sky meets the water and becomes all blue. Anyway, aside.
Right.
That's what I mean by the conversation of art, which is, it's a very refined historical look at why we still make this stuff and have for 3,000 years, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I see like a lot of artists who are like you, who are steeped in art history. You know, you have an understanding of where your art is in context with other artists and historical movements and even broader cultural conversations. But some artists don't want to do that. Some artists don't want to participate in that conversation, or they just sort of ignore it. And
know that is totally cool. You know, like, and I think saying that's important. You know, I think people need to say, hey, it's cool if you just like to make bunnies. Right on. Like, paint bunnies all day long. That's awesome. You know, like, if that's your thing. Or if you're like into graffiti art and you just like graffiti, go, you know, like, you know what I mean? Like, do your thing. Whatever your thing is, find an outlet for it. I think I was having dinner with Felix last night, and I said, you know, art is just that you have to make stuff. Like, you have to. You're not happy if you're not, you know? And I think that's a really, really big point, is some people just gotta quilt, you know? They don't know why. They just have to. That's the G's Ben quilts, you know? And they just happen to turn into this thing that is at the Atlanta High Museum. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, I think there's artists and makers of all kinds of stuff. So
yeah, so people either make art as a form of self-expression or a way of getting something out, or they are making art as a response to something that's happening around them. Yeah. And one of the things that I saw you talk about in an interview, which I jumped on, was you mentioned reading Francis Mallmann's book, and Francis is a chef. And he is interviewed for an episode of Chef's Table, which is a Netflix documentary. It's amazing. It's like just food art. It's so gorgeous. And I'm curious for you, like, where's the connection between things like reading books about food and your art? You know, how does that influence your work?
I don't think, you know, I mean, some people do. Some people think like a painting sits on a wall and that's it, you know, and then there's a history to that. I see art as more like a living of life. It's more like it's like a metaphor, you know what I mean? Like, and so when I saw Francis Mallmann's lifestyle, I thought it was very artistic. And speaking of Francis Mallmann, the reason you're watching Francis Mallmann is he was like a 3-star Michelin chef that's incredibly talented. I think he served like potatoes at like the World Summit on Culinary whatever, and he won, you know? And so there's something to Francis that is an ass. I mean, to be quite frank, he's very, very full of himself. But it takes a certain person to live on an island by yourself, you know, catch and filleting them and then making a dish for people, you know? So I really loved his simplicity of life. And I read his book, The 7 Sacred Fires, mainly because a guy named David Chang referenced him again, which I love David Chang, by the way. If you've ever been to Momofuku in New York, it's one of my favorite restaurants. I was just there.
It's one of the big ones.
Oh, it's brilliant. Have you been there?
I have not, but I'm familiar with the place.
Well, anyway, yeah, there's the noodle bar, and then there's the Som bar, which is like a little step up, which is where I go. It's still expensive, but it's not like astronomical, you know? Anyway, I digress. With Francis Mallmann, I just saw a guy that was incredibly talented and then became very rooted to his regional whatever, you know, Patagonia. And he just wanted to share it with people. And I think that sincerity comes through. He's like, listen, guys, let's just fillet a beef cow and put it over a big fire and, you know, make cool, awesome meat steaks. But he's not just a dude butchering a cow. He honors that tradition of the gaucho, you know? So he's like kind of a combination of like a mystic poet and a cook and a really interesting dude, you know?
Like
and so like
performance art chef.
I think the poetry of that is really cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you've talked a little bit before about your work being autobiographical, and maybe early on you weren't 100% sure that it was autobiographical. How for some artists, they're afraid to put that level of investment or emotional capital into the work. Did that just occur naturally for you, or were there barriers that you had to push through?
Yeah, I think, again, like, that's the way I make work. Not everybody makes work. Like, and I want to stress that there's a lot of different ways to make work and a lot of different reasons to make work. The way I make work is, I was actually speaking with a pretty neat curator Friday at his museum, and I said, Marcus, why is that painting so interesting? I keep looking at it. It's Sorolla, which is Joaquin Sorolla. He's a friend of John Singer Sargent. It was said with Sargent that if he was full up on commissions, he'd say, call the Spaniard, you know, Sorolla. He's as good as I am, if not better. And so Sorolla did a painting of his wife, and I've seen this painting probably 6 times over the past 3 years, and I keep going back to it. And I said, Marcus, why is that so good? I mean, I'm looking at 6 portraits that Sorolla did, and they're all good. They're great. They're rendered well, but the care of his wife is just phenomenal. Is the reason that I keep doing these autobiographies with my brother, with my mom, with my dad, with myself, and I'm constantly referencing my own understanding of reality. Does that make the paintings better? And he said, of course it does. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, because you're personally invested into it. You're thinking through it. You're thinking through the painting rather than just painting. Does that make sense? But again, that's my process, you know?
Yeah, so we do, you know, I talk to a lot of artists who say things like they go into a trance when they paint and they don't think and it just comes out. And I think that there's some validity to that, to, you know, not getting in your own way when you're painting. But there's also, I think, a challenge with not putting enough thought into the work or enough emotion into the work. And I'm not sure what that is or where that needs to come from.
Yeah, I think like a lot of things to say is like a lot of people make work for different reasons. You know, like a good friend of mine, David Almaguer, he's very specific about why he makes work. It's about the stencil. It's about a story. But it's not really about himself. It's more about like things that he finds interesting, which inevitably is about himself, but kind of in a roundabout way. Or my friend Don, you know, right in the next room, he's paintings just in a day or 2, and that's it. But he's got his own process. He's got his own way of making work valid and interesting. For whatever reason, I have to make these huge systems in my mind. And I think I go back to the installation work where I say, I don't know why I have to make this, do. And I think that's kind of what happens with figuring out the way that you work. Does that make sense? Because inevitably it's up to you to do it. Like nobody's going to do it for you. Unless like you're Jeff, you got, 40 studio systems and crank out your paintings,
Yeah.
That's fine too. Whatever, that's a out Takashi Murakami, their own studio systems. You know what I mean?
Right. Mm-hmm.
I kind of is more the Francis. Like I want to hang out in Brooklyn in some obscure spaces and figure out life, and then you know what I mean. So
let me ask you
it's
this:
not better or worse. It just is.
Yeah, you mentioned just a second ago that you build systems in your mind before you paint something. What does that mean?
So I went. Don's laughing. I have to create these structures, and it's like a movie, right? So I remember talking to the painter named Larry Graber, who's a painter in San Antonio, and he said, Rex, there comes a time when you just accept who you are, and you just go forward, And for me, especially the newer series I'm working with the Sheen Center, I have to create these hero myths, and I have to create these kind of lore about whatever. There's a beginning, there's an end, there's a cast of characters, which are paintings, and then that cast of characters and that narrative may wind on for 2 or 3 years. And I rarely write it. I mean, I write about it, but it's more like disjointed. But at the end of it, the paintings come out. And I was talking with Felix last night at the Odeon, and I said, Felix, I don't know if I have to build all this stuff, but honestly, who cares? It makes great paintings, So as long as the end product is something interesting, that's all that matters, And the way that you spend your time rationalizing that existence, it just makes paintings more interesting. Some people that'll tell me, like, you're totally full of it. Why do you need to? Is it energy? I'm like, well, not for me. You know what I mean? Like for someone else, I'm sure it is, but for me, I enjoy it. Other people enjoy it too. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. So one of our audience just said you're a script writer, but instead of writing it, you instead of writing the world you build, you paint the world you build. I think that's a pretty interesting analogy.
Yeah, I'm dyslexic, and I took when I was a kid. Important to really, the Greek said, "Know thyself," and so in my dyslexia, I was told I wouldn't pass the 4th grade. Actually, I wasn't told that. My parents were told that. And they said, well, forget that. We're going to put him in different learning. And so we went to a small private school, and an art teacher, Gail Smith, who I still talk with to today, sat me in a corner and just said, you're a studio student, go out. And I've kind of spent the rest of my life in that corner, She figured out how to get me out of some other classes so that I could take more art, And I think being a script writer, I always wished I was a movie maker, but not money to do that. And number 2, I don't have the resources or the know-how. I know how to paint,
Right.
Right. So because of my own devices, I just pick what I know. I love film. I reference it in my artist statement, which some people probably don't get. But I love like Michel Gondry. He's a French filmmaker that did Be Kind, Rewind. Or there's like Wes Anderson. The Royal Tenenbaums is about one of my favorite movies in the world.
I love Wes Anderson. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, fantastic!
It's so much fun to watch. Yeah.
That's actually how I explain my family. I'm like, we're like the Royal Tenenbaums, just less eccentric.
Whoa, that's awesome.
I mean, we really are. My mom rides horses. My dad designs furniture. My brother plays like 10 different instruments. Nuts, and in a good way. But I think that explains a lot.
That's pretty cool. So you mentioned in an interview that one of your favorite videos is Alexander Calder's performance, circus performance. And if you haven't seen, we'll put a link up to this on YouTube. When I heard you talk about it, I went and looked it up. And it's kind of crazy because I didn't know that Calder did anything like this. And I know Calder from his mobiles. And,
Right.
And then he has this whole other thing where he made these dolls out of wire and other materials, and they're so cool. So I'm curious, like, why did that have such a big impact on you?
Well, I think there's a guy named Peter who lives in Houston that's a teacher at Rice. And we were working on a project in China with him through UTSA with Dr. Romo and Arturo Eda. And I helped curate the show. And we went over to China to know these different photographers that were from Texas. Peter Brown is a very well-known photographer person. He and his wife are incredible, and their dog Mackie. And Peter came over to my studio to see the mill and said, "Oh my God, your studio is just like Alexander Calder." And I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Well," I said, "You have got to be kidding me." He said, "No." I knew him quite well. And I said, "That's interesting." Actually reminded me of Calder a lot. And I said, "Well, thanks, Peter." And he goes,
flattering.
And so I wanted to find out, well, why did this guy that knew Calder so well think? And so I started digging into Calder. And good God, the man is a giant child. He's amazing. And anybody that knows me, I'm the same way, man. I'm just like a big spaz, and I love playing with stuff. My studio is a total bomb blast of toys.
I can vouch for that.
Yeah, Don just said he can vouch for it. Right, Don?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's like, yep. So I'm like a big kid. My brother's about to have a kid, and I'm secretly stashing all these books and socks and baby shoes and little toys everywhere I can find them, because I'm really buying them for the child, but I'm really buying them for myself, you know.
Yeah.
The kid, of course, you know.
We don't have kids at home, but we have two like furniture ottomans that you can remove the top. They're like storage containers, and they're full of toys for all of our friends' kids. And I love it. I love having them.
Generation we grew up in, like, we're toy freaks, you know. Like, I mean, think about some of these collectors' toys that are going for like, look at Comic. That's nuts. And I mean, anyway, like, I was just from Japan, Gundam, and they're like, "Oh my, you know about Gundam?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, Gundams are awesome." I don't think I really get into all the storylines and stuff, but I just like the toys themselves, you know, and building them.
What are Gundams?
Gundam is like it's like a samurai suit that moves with a big nerd thing, but my brother and I used to watch Gundam on Toonami when we were 13 and 14, and I've always remembered that. And then my parents took TV out when we were 13 and 14. And so it's like my mind stayed in that 1998 era. And so for whatever reason, I never progressed. So I've always stayed in that era of Toonami, you know? And so I still remember I was up in New York eating sushi with a guy, painter, Lower East, was with Sloan Fine Art, but Hide was Takashi Murakami's studio assistant, and like his manager, and he moved to New York to pursue his painting career. And sitting there, sushi, pick up this Japanese newspaper and I'll go, "Oh my gosh, it's a Gundam! It's a 9-foot robot in Tokyo." Google it, man. 59-foot Gundam in Tokyo. You will find out. And
so,
the second one, you know?
One of our Sharia from our team, she does all of the show notes and transcription for these interviews, she's watching this right now, and I'm imagining that she's rolling her eyes trying to figure out how she's going to spell all of this stuff that you just rolled off.
Well, God bless you. It's Gundam, Gundam. But what's cool about it is I love that object of play, to come back to Calder. You know, his art was more about risk. It was like, can I make this thing work? Can I build this thing? What is it going to look like? Another is Red Grooms. He was very much the same. And so knowing kind of this playful, serious, playful take on things. Does that make sense? Like, you can talk with me, you can tell really quickly I'm pretty serious about, you know, philosophy and painting and art history, but I'm not hemmed in by it, you know, and I really have fun, man. And not everything
that shows
is
up
fun.
in your work too, right? Like the donuts pieces.
The donuts is a very specific, it's a specific reference, man. Like when I first started coming on to New York, I crashed on John Cowan's couch. He and his wife Vanessa are amazing. They've lived up here. They just moved to Boston, but John would let me crash on their couch. At the end of my stays, usually money for was a box of donuts, and I never told him that, but it was always my thank you. At the end of the stay, it was just some donuts. And that pink sprinkle donut was my favorite, and John his favorite. It was like a cream fill or something, but sprinkle donut became this icon for me. It's like if I can just have enough money left over that I can say thank you, you know, that's all I need. And so that very be a small thing that doesn't much, but it's what you can. And then I'd go back home and sell some more paintings and, you know, re-up and pay all my bills and do what I need to do. You know what I mean? That's what I think. Speaking of food, there's a chef that's in, I think he's in Mississippi or something. And he's this really cutting edge guy. And he said he went from New York to wherever to open a restaurant. And the guy was really famous, at least in the region. And he was able to hold his restaurant. It was like a really, you know, 1-star or something like that. And the guy said, well, you can live in my office while you're apprenticing with me out of this game and retire. And I want you to take over. Can you do that? And so the years went on, I was true to his word. And, you know, all these years go by and this guy learns the business and has his clientele. And then he hands him the key to the apartment, to the restaurant. The guy buys it. He puts enough money together to buy it, or a loan or whatever. And he says, my advice to you is pay the rent on time, take care of your clients, and do what you love. And that's it. He left. Like, advice, that was it, you know? And for young
pretty
artists,
good advice.
I would say the same. Pay your rent on time, love what you do, and do what you say you're going to do and take care of your clients, you know? And I think that's really the key to all of it. Your clients being your friends, your family, people that work your work, directors that gave you like a big break, say thank you. Don't forget them, you know? I was eating, I'm going to take a shout out to Felix Padron, who was the director of Office of Cultural Affairs for like 25 years in San Antonio. I saw on Facebook that he was in New York. I'm on a cell. I said, hey, Felix, you in the city? It's like, yeah. And so I went to dinner with my friend Don and his friend Kim. And I said, guys, I really got to go. I got to meet this guy. He's an old friend. And I'm like, yeah, man, go. Do your thing. And so I took off, went down to the Tribeca. And Felix was like, of all the people that are in New York right now, Rex, we're having drinks at the Odeon. You know why I picked here? I was like, why, Felix? He's like, because I started my career waiting, like running a restaurant right around the corner. Some of my clients were Johnny Depp and Robert De Niro. And that was the beginning of my life, you know, like, and I came to the Odeon on Friday nights with all my friends who were chefs. And this is where we hung out till 3 a.m. And he goes, Tribeca is a totally different place now. I mean, if you were walking around at this time of night, you were taking your life in your hands, you know, look at it. You know, it's got the Tribeca Film Festival. It's got all these really super high-end things. But he said something to me last night that was really neat. And I wrote a napkin. And I wanted to give this advice to whoever. It's learn how to be. That makes sense? Like, just learn how to be in life. Meaning, it's a way of life. And then he said to me, they're going to remember what you've left behind as an artist. Not so much who you are, but they're going to remember who you were. And he also said, don't forget people, you know? And he said, really successful people that get this, it's not about success really. Because at the end of the day, if you really try hard and all you can do is buy a donut for someone, well, that's a in and of itself. And so I think what I would say more than anything is really learn what that is for you. Does that make sense? You know, like
it does. Yeah.
If you want to drive a Bentley, well, I would not suggest becoming an artist if that's important to you. Some people may drive a Bentley and be artists. Good on you, man. Right on. You know, you made it, if that's your goal. They've never sold a painting in their life, and they never want to. They just want to make great quilts to give to their kids. But
yeah.
Do you see what I mean? Like
I do.
And I think it needs to be said more and more, quite frankly, because we're around a lot of artists, and people are like, oh, you know, I never got to show in museums, and I'm painted for 30 years. I mean, a good example is Robert De Niro. Like, we went into his restaurant at, I think it was like 12 o'clock at night. They were closing up. But Felix told me, he's like, hey, you know those are Robert De Niro's dad's paintings. I said, what? He goes, yeah, his dad was a painter. And when he bought this restaurant, he put all his dad's paintings up. And he kept his studio, his dad's studio, kind of as a time box, like Pollock's studio up in East Hamptons or whatever. He kept his apartment as a studio, as like a museum. And that's cool. So something to realize, it may not be in your lifetime that you become the thing you were needing to be. But do you think Nero's dad could ever be happier than seeing his son be who he is? You know, that's just cool. So I try to encourage people to see the longer game. I think art is cool, right? Painting is cool. But if you ask my friends and family, I would hope they say I was a good human, not a great artist. And I mean, I hope I'm a great artist. That's really great. I mean, that's a great goal, but
You're okay.
Yeah. Whatever, Don. Thanks. He said you're okay. You're okay. I would really hope that, you know, you're a good human being.
That is.
Yeah.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks for the comments, Don. Cool. All right. Well, Rex, this is probably a great place for us to wrap up. If people wanted to know more about you and your work, where should they follow you or connect with you at?
Well, I think the best way is just go to my website, rexhausman.com. It's REXHAUSMAN.com. Designed by my brother's wife. Shout out, Daisha. You do a great job. And my brother helped update it. And then Facebook. I love social media. Like, it's really quite fantastic. I do Instagram and I do Facebook a lot. I mean, don't bombard me with stuff. I got to figure it out. But and I'm going to be on a plane in like 3 hours back to San Antonio. Also, I have a residency at the Sheen Center, which is in the West Village, Scott? What is it? Nolita. In April and May, and I'll be having a big exhibition in 2019 there. So cool. That's really the way to kind of keep in touch with me. If you come down to San Antonio, I mean, come to the studio anytime.
Sounds good, man. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Hey, Corey, thanks for doing this, man. You rock.
All right. Bye.
Bye.